Can everybody see the screen? Just a little thumbs up should suffice. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, again, my name is Collin Marozzi. I am a policy strategist with the ACLU of Ohio. And today I have been asked to give a presentation on what the ACLU's top 3 priorities are moving into 2021. There is a lot happening in the state of Ohio right now, as you know. Even aside from the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, we are currently in the midst of our budget season, where we will be determining and allocating how to spend roughly $60 billion over the next 2 years. We are also, this is the year of redistricting, which I will get to in the presentation. But we also have some very exciting developments in other policy areas that the ACLU is very interested in and have been pushing for some time. So I'm very excited about the prospects of 2021, and I hope after the presentation and discussion this evening, I hope you all are as well. So I will just go ahead and jump right in. And what's the ACLU priorities in our history and present day have really maintained consistency. Our number 1 priority has always been to ensure and protect constitutional freedoms for our citizens and for all people in the United States. Most importantly, our free speech, due process, and equal protection. That is where we have had the most impact on shaping public policy and our way of life in this country. And that's typically been through the courtroom. However, as I'll discuss later, we are beginning to branch out into more different ways of enacting our agenda. We also do a lot of work in the criminal justice space, particularly around sentencing reform, as well as drug sentencing. And those are a number of our immediate priorities moving forward into 2021. And then also a traditional priority for the ACLU has been the protection and expansion of voting rights in this country. There have been a number of court cases that the ACLU has participated and led. Most notably in the state of Ohio was the gerrymandering case that was taken up to the Ohio Supreme Court, or up to the United States Supreme Court rather, in 2018 before it was sent back to state court to be decided in that jurisdiction. And as I said, historically, we have pursued our agenda and enacted and achieved our goals through litigation. However, the ACLU nationally has begun in the last 10 years or so a more integrated advocacy strategy, meaning we have expanded our staff to include not only our legal team, but also the policy team, which I am a part of, as well as our communications and our organizing team, in order to build our grassroots base and to speak with and get in touch with Ohioans in their communities, going to them, listening to their concerns, and trying to get a better pulse of the state for what we should be doing moving forward. I will say that the 3 priorities that I will be discussing tonight have all been as a result of a statewide listening tour that our organizing team went on, and that has informed the rest of the departments at the ACLU of Ohio what our priorities and what our work should be focused on in 2021. So, specifically looking at 2021, our top 3 priorities are first and foremost bail reform. And then following that is the repeal of the death penalty in the state of Ohio. And then lastly is the redistricting process and working to ensure fair maps for the next 10 years, both at the state level and at the congressional level. These 3 policy issues are all priorities for 3 different reasons. Bail reform is the focal point of the ACLU's National Campaign for Smart Justice. This was a dedicated effort to get more involved in criminal justice reform, and the ACLU has deemed bail reform to be its #1 priority in that space. Death penalty repeal, this is kind of a priority due to the moment. I'll describe later in the presentation, but the environment of Ohio is ripe for repeal of the death penalty. This has been a long campaign, much longer than our campaign for smart justice. The ACLU of Ohio in particular has had the repeal of the death penalty as one of its top priorities ever since it was reinstituted in the state in 1981. And then finally, our third top priority of this year is redistricting, and that is simply because now is the time that we redistrict. So of course it is a priority since it is time sensitive, and there is no second chance following this year's map drawing process. So we will begin the presentation with a discussion of what bail reform looks like. And to do that, we first need to understand exactly what it is when we're talking about bail. I'm sure most here do know, but for those that may not, bail is a mechanism that is used in our criminal justice system that grants a temporary release of custody, usually through the requirement of a cash payment in order to guarantee an accused individual's appearance in court. Accused is bolded here because that word and that principle of bail reform. Now, these are all accused individuals, not convicted, is at the center of why we believe bail reform is so critical for the state. And also, how is bail used? Bail is used pretty much at the sole discretion.
I've got it.
Carry on.
All righty. So bail is used primarily at the judge's discretion. The judge has sole discretion in any sort of pretrial hearing to either grant or set bail, or bail can be denied for an individual who has been arrested and accused of a crime. By denying bail, that essentially it takes all options away. The individual must stay in the custody of the jail until their arraignment and the rest of their proceedings move forward. But granting bail is a mechanism of release that individuals who have been arrested can put up a bond in order to secure their release. And then once they were to come back for their continued proceedings, whether it be their arraignment or some sort of hearing, they would get that money back. It's important to note, though, that Ohio law does not require the use of cash bail. This is a policy set at the county level, at the county common pleas courts, municipal courts, and other jurisdictions as well. So why does Ohio need bail reform? Why does the ACLU of Ohio think Ohio needs bail reform? Well, bail reform is an important step in ending Ohio's unjust and frankly racist system of mass incarceration that over-polices and over-criminalizes poverty and communities of color. It has this racial injustice and racial disparity in utilizing cash bail is born through years of data analyzing this system, and it is proven to be one of the key components to the mass incarceration plague that has been spreading throughout the country for decades. Secondly, is that it eliminates Ohio's two-tiered system of justice. It is inherently unequal when you are putting the freedom of somebody up to the balance of their checking account, whether or not they can afford to pay their bond in order to secure their freedom, or whether they cannot does not depend upon the circumstances of the crime in most cases. A lot of the times bail is set indiscriminately, meaning it's just a blanket tool used, and it does deliver a disparate outcome where poor Ohioans are forced to languish in jail for days, weeks, even months on end, awaiting trial for what many would consider low-level crimes, whereas somebody who does in fact pose a more legitimate risk of evading justice once they have left jail custody, or a threat to the safety of either an individual or the public at large, if they have the money in their checking account, they can post bail and they have their freedom. So this is an inherently unequal system, and it preys upon the poor and the people without. And finally, pretrial detention robs people of their families and of their livelihoods. I will read an excerpt from a report we published in 2020 that depicts in vivid terms this scenario. But when you wait in a jail cell, pre-trial, you haven't been convicted, you're just waiting to go in front of a judge. Like I said, that can last days, weeks, months. All the while, you're unable to go to work. You're unable to pay for your mortgage or your rent. You may lose custody of your children. You're unable to access medical care. It has a ripple effect throughout the community and throughout the family of these people who are subject to this injustice and subject to this this arcane system. Oh, and I do want to say I have included hyperlinks in this presentation. You'll see here this hyperlink is to the ACLU of Ohio's webpage, where you could download the full bail reform report that I alluded to a little while ago. This is a couple of graphs that are included in that report. And these two graphs really do signify how the use of cash bail and the mass incarceration of pre-trial innocent individuals, they have not been convicted of a crime yet, has steadily risen in recent history in the state of Ohio. All the while, crime has actually declined from its peak in the early 90s. These charts are startling, eye-opening visualizations of the issue that we're currently facing, which is that crime is going down, but somehow Ohio's incarcerated population still seems to go up and up. And even though we have seen a tapering off to a plateau of pretrial and all jail incarcerations, you can see it is still well above the level that it was in the 1970s. In fact, since the mid-1970s, nearly 4.5 times more Ohioans are currently sitting in jail pre-trial. So this is an epidemic of incarceration that Ohio is currently enduring, and these charts and illustrations bear that out. Another set of startling statistics are in Ohio on any given day, 3,000 people who are charged with a misdemeanor are being held pre-trial, currently incarcerated for a misdemeanor that they have not been convicted of yet. Most common of these misdemeanor offenses is driving under suspension, not having a valid driver's license. This is unconscionable that Ohioans are facing the ramifications of, the ripple effect of consequences that we talked about earlier for simply driving with a expired license or a suspended license, and they don't have the adequate finances to secure their release. It's a slippery slope that unfortunately too many Ohioans have fallen down through. Again, 9,600 people on any day in Ohio are charged with felonies and held in pretrial detention 70% of those charged for these felonies are for non-person crimes, property crimes, theft, things of that nature. And the most common of these is drug possession. Again, the ACLU of Ohio's official position is that, and I think the data will bear this out as well, that we cannot incarcerate our way out of the drug problem that has crippled communities in both Ohio and across the country since the mid-1980s. However, we continue to utilize cash bail for these types of arrests. And it again has just led to the explosion of our jail population. Currently, Ohio jails are at 130% capacity, and that also relatively mirrors the amount of overcapacity Ohio's prisons are in as well. So this is not only a jail problem, but it's also a prison problem, this mass incarceration. All totaled, keeping these legally innocent people in jail costs Ohioans, costs you and me, costs taxpayers between $195 and $253 million annually. That's $2.5 billion over 10 years. And now, as Ohio is facing critical budget constraints due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the effects that has had in our economy, the ACLU of Ohio thinks that there can be a much better use of our tax dollars than keeping legally innocent individuals behind bars. We do believe that this money should be redirected to community support services in order to divert these individuals away from incarceration and into treatment, into a community-focused response that can help alleviate these issues in a more robust way. But these are not just, this is not the only cost of pretrial detention in Ohio. The true cost for pretrial detention in Ohio is the human cost. It's the human capital that is lost when individuals fall victim to this vicious cycle. And if you'll permit me, I want to share an excerpt from our bail report that's linked in the couple slides ago. And I want to share a story of an individual we interviewed when putting together this report. And the words here, I wouldn't be able to do them justice, so I'm just going to go ahead and read a brief excerpt. This is Maurice's story. In 2018, Maurice Jennings was living what he described as his best life. He was a security guard at Procter & Gamble, a job he loved and held for 5 years. It provided him stability. He rented his own apartment, took great pride in his work, and was self-sufficient and happy. On May 1st, 2018, it all changed when he was arrested for a crime he did not commit. Maurice was subsequently charged with 2 counts of felonious assault for an incident that he not only was not involved in, but had no knowledge of, as it had taken place while he was on duty at work. He was taken to jail and a cash bond was set for $250,000. Maurice, who was unable to pay, was forced to remain in jail. Later, after he was indicted, the cash bond amount was raised to $500,000, resulting in him having to spend 4 months in jail before a friend was able to pay a bail bondsman enough money to procure his release. Once he was back in the community, Maurice was able to hire an attorney and quickly gather the evidence to demonstrate his innocence, including his timesheet, which showed he was at work at the exact time that the crime was committed. As a result, Maurice's case was dismissed. But that did not end his struggle. While in jail for a crime he did not commit and unable to post cash bond, Maurice lost his job and his apartment. Additionally, he sold nearly all of his possessions to hire an attorney upon his release. Now he lives with a friend, still unable to afford a place of his own since he was released from jail. While stories of wrongful arrest are unfortunately not rare, their life-altering negative side effects can and should be. Maurice's life was upended not only because he was falsely arrested, but because he could not afford to post money for bond. While Maurice was losing everything, Hamilton County spent nearly $9,000 to keep him in jail for 4 months. If that doesn't illustrate in clear terms why Ohio needs to enact bail reform, I don't know what will. Individual accused of a crime he did not commit had to sit in jail for 4 months, lost his job, lost his home, lost almost all of his possessions. This is why relying on cash bail disproportionately delivers injustice for those who can't afford to pay. And it's the ACLU of Ohio's mission to make sure that stories like Maurice's become extinct. So what does real reform look like in the state of Ohio? Well, first and foremost, we want to see a statewide policy of a presumption of release. So what that means is that it is presumed that when an individual is arrested and brought in, they are processed at the jail, and then they are released that same day. Now, this falls directly in line and is entirely consistent with the mantra of the American judicial system that you're innocent until proven guilty. If we are truly holding the ideal of every person is innocent until proven guilty, then nobody who has not been convicted of a crime should not be denied their freedom unless very specific circumstances are met and very extreme circumstances are met. The exceptions that we would recommend are for flight risks, for legitimate flight risks, specifically those who have the means and the resources to flee the state and or the country upon their release from jail, or also those who have been deemed to be a credible threat to a specific individual rather than to the abstract public safety, which is currently the norm used now. Now, for those that do meet these qualifications, these exceptions, the flight risks, the individual, specifically threatening to an individual, we would require a hearing to discuss and implement conditions of release within 48 hours of that individual's arrest. And those conditions would include anything from pretrial supervision to employment requirements, GIS monitoring, and in specific circumstances, money bond. These are common sense reforms to a broken system that, as we just discussed, cripples communities, it rips families apart, and serves no practical purpose in Ohio other than to fill state coffers and flood our jails with legally innocent people. So we are very excited about this push for bail reform. We have been working with legislators and other stakeholder groups to determine how the best way to move forward is. And we are committed to working with the Ohio General Assembly and anybody, frankly, to see that Ohio can make these meaningful reforms to our cash bail system. So that was priority number one. The second priority of the state is the death penalty repeal. And before we get into that, I want to just kind of give the current landscape of where we're at. Governor Mike DeWine has unofficially issued a death penalty moratorium in the state of Ohio. He has deemed that death penalty by lethal injection is no longer a feasible option for the state of Ohio moving forward. The reason for that is the pharmaceutical companies that produce and distribute the drugs that are used in Ohio's death penalty have essentially given the state an ultimatum to where they will not use these drugs as a way to execute individuals. And if the state refuses and they continue to use these drugs, then they will be not sold to the state of Ohio. This has compelled Governor DeWine to issue these blanket extensions to inmates who are on death row. And it's a signal that even, the free market itself is beginning to have shifting opinions on the death penalty as well. And then also an encouraging step was just passed and signed into law back in December of 2020. And this was a repeal for the death penalty for offenders who suffer from a severe mental illness at the time of their crime. This was House Bill 136 from the 133rd General Assembly. It was sponsored by Representative Hillier from Tuscarawas County, who's a former Tuscarawas County prosecutor. And this is a great leap forward, even though it's a narrow exception for the death penalty, to where you must have a diagnosed condition of one of 5 conditions that have been listed in state law that you are no longer eligible for the death penalty. Though this is a narrow exception, it again is another signal that appetite for repeal of the death penalty in Ohio is strengthening, and that there's a willingness of our lawmakers to move on this issue, which has typically been a very pro-death penalty institution. And we can attribute this growth and this shifting of opinion to a really encouraging growth of grassroots support and grassroots organizations across the state that are working to repeal the death penalty in Ohio. Obviously, the American Civil Liberties Union of Ohio has been working on this issue for decades. However, over the past 10 years, we've seen a number of other groups begin to form and begin entering this space as advocates for repeal. And 2 of the most notable groups that I would mention are Ohioans to Stop Executions and Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. These are non-traditional allies, as we would say. Obviously, conservatives concerned about the death penalty. This is a monumental step as we're beginning to see movement among some of the most traditional proponents of the death penalty. They are beginning to rally to the cause of eliminating the death penalty in Ohio due to a number of factors: fiscal constraints, a big brother mentality that the state is able to put citizens to death, among a number of others. So we are really encouraged to have new allies in this fight, and it's indicative of the people of Ohio, how they are beginning to really mobilize to see the death penalty repealed in the state. And we want to see the death penalty repealed because it's a broken approach to public safety and criminal justice. First and foremost, it is a cruel and unusual punishment, explicitly forbidden in the Bill of Rights. And the ACLU of Ohio has stood firmly behind this assertion that the death penalty does in fact constitute a cruel and unusual punishment. And the ACLU is happy that we are not alone in this in this thinking. I'm going to read an excerpt from a dissenting opinion that was authored by former Ohio Supreme Court Justice Bill O'Neill in 2013 when he dissented to an order setting the execution date for Jeffrey Wogenstall. The dissent states, "The death penalty is inherently both cruel and unusual, and therefore is unconstitutional. Capital punishment dates back to the days when decapitations, hangings, and brandings were also the norm. Surely our society has evolved since those barbaric days. To date, 17 states in the District of Columbia have eliminated the death penalty altogether. It is clear that the death penalty is becoming increasingly rare both around the world and in America. By definition, it is unusual." Now, this was written in 2013, and he states that 17 states in the District of Columbia have eliminated the death penalty. That number is now at 23. Nearly half the states in the United States have eliminated the death penalty, only furthering the strength of his argument that with the fewer number of states that are actually carrying out executions, it only lends more credibility to the argument that it is in fact an unusual punishment. We don't believe that any additional evidence needs to be shown that it is cruel, considering that the basis for the death penalty is based more on revenge than on justice. And we think that the public acknowledgement of this by leading legal minds in the state will only add more value and only add a more rich conversation and more rich evidence for Ohio lawmakers to take into consideration when debating to repeal the death penalty. Another very critical reason for why this is a broken approach is the racial injustice and the racial disparities that are seen in every data set when you're looking at state-sponsored executions in the state of Ohio. I have statistics here that were put together in a report by Ohioans to Stop Executions. In this report, it says, when looking at capitally indicted murders across Ohio over the history of the death penalty statute, 2/3 of all murder victims in the state are people of color. Yet 3 out of 4 death sentences are for the murder of white people. Since executions resumed in Ohio, nearly 77% have been for the murder of white people. So when communities of color and individuals of color constitute 2/3 of all murders in the state, and yet 3/4 of all death penalty capital cases are for the murder of white people, we see an inherently unjust and racially biased system. We see that through the fact that 15% of Ohio's population is African American. However, over 50% of all people on death row in Ohio are African American. These are typically crimes that the prosecutor, the county prosecutor, has the discretion to charge individuals with varying levels of punishment. And we've seen in the data, as I just alluded, that more times than not, when an individual has been convicted of murder or is charged with murder and they are African American, they are much more likely to receive a charge or to receive a death penalty indictment. Also, another inherently unequal application of the death penalty in Ohio is the geographic disparity in which these cases occur. Cuyahoga County is actually in the 2nd percentile of Ohio of national counties that pursue death penalty outcomes. Almost 50% of all death penalty cases in Ohio originate in Cuyahoga County. And this is a testament to how it is an unequal application of justice when it is wholly dependent upon where you live, your skin color, and the financial resources of your county's criminal justice system in order to pursue these death penalty cases. Because we know for a fact, and we'll get to this point in a moment, that death penalty cases have exorbitant costs associated with them through the amount of expert testimony, appeals process, and a litany of factors that make capital crime investigations and judicial proceedings a much more financial burden on both the county and the state. This was never more evident than during budget negotiations in the last General Assembly, the 133rd General Assembly. In that budget, there was a provision that included a cash payment to Pike County after Pike County commissioners came and pleaded to the state legislature for funding so they could pursue a capital case against the charged offenders in the Roden family murders. I don't know if anybody's familiar, but that is a case that happened in 2016 where a number of family members were found murdered in their homes in Pike County. And the county, Pike County, did not have enough money to pursue this prosecution. So they had to go to the state. They had to actually lobby state lawmakers to send them a check so they could pursue this. Case in point, the county, Pike County's budget is $10 million annually. And the Pike County commissioner who testified in front of the Senate Budget Committee said that it would cost $4 million to prosecute this case. Obviously, that is an unequal application of justice, because if you commit these crimes or if you are charged with these crimes and you're from a rural, more poor county, your county prosecutor is not going to pursue the death penalty because they just don't have the financial resources to do so. Again, this all reverts back to an unequal application of justice. And last but not least, it has been essentially agreed to by experts and stakeholders working in this space that the death penalty does not provide a deterrent to violent crime. It is not a tool or a stick, as many death penalty proponents like to characterize it. You know, it's the carrot and the stick argument, and the death penalty is the stick that they need to hold over individuals. However, we see that that doesn't work, and we see that the threat of a death penalty case has no bearing on whether or not an individual commits a violent crime. Now, very exciting development in terms of the death penalty repeal movement in the state of Ohio was actually very recent. Excuse me. A recent poll that was conducted in October of 2020 shows that Ohioans, the people en masse, are ready to end the death penalty. And it's a very exciting poll. 59% of Ohioans support replacing the death penalty with life without parole, and that includes 69% support from Democrats and 53% support from Republicans. That is a huge figure. 6 in 10 Ohioans want to see life without parole replace the death penalty. That number is actually inverted from a decade ago, where it was in fact the opposite. 60% of Ohioans favored the death penalty in select crimes. Additionally, the poll found that only 35% of Ohioans prefer the death penalty as a punishment for first-degree murder. There are a number of different avenues that folks have said they support, including life without any possibility of parole, parole after 40 years, after 20 years. But it's a very encouraging number to see that roughly only 1 in 3 Ohioans still believe that the death penalty should be the #1 form of punishment for first-degree murder. And last but not least, and maybe the most exciting number of this poll, which it might not seem that exciting, is that only 9% of Ohioans are less likely to support a political candidate they disagree with on the death penalty. Why is this so critical? Why is this so exciting for death penalty repeal advocates like myself and the ACLU? It's because that gives politicians cover. You know, we know that politicians are very susceptible to public opinion, and they you know, are a representative of their constituency. So to have such a low number of Ohioans say that they would not support you if you didn't agree with them on the death penalty is a very encouraging sign, because it'll allow lawmakers to vote their conscience, and it'll allow lawmakers to work to put the best death penalty repeal bill in place, because there's not a gigantic threat of them losing support from their constituents. And that has left the General Assembly poised for action in this legislative term and in 2021. On February 18th, there was a bipartisan press conference that was hosted at the Ohio State House. I have linked it in the presentation here. And this was a press conference of lawmakers, of stakeholders, and of affected people, excuse me, bringing forth their bipartisan proposal to end the death penalty in Ohio. We have legislation introduced in the Ohio House of Representatives by Representative Adam Miller of the west side of Columbus, my state representative, and also Representative Jean Schmidt from Claremont County, a freshman member, but she has a lot of experience in government. She was formerly in the Ohio House, as well as serving as a member of Ohio's congressional delegation as well. And then in the Senate side, we have Senator Steve Huffman and Senator Nikki Antonio on board as co-sponsors of a death penalty repeal bill, as well as a number of other senators who have signed on as joint sponsors. Again, bipartisan joint sponsors on that bill as well. Very exciting development. Senator Antonio has introduced a death penalty repeal bill every legislative session. She has been a member of the Ohio General Assembly, either as a member of the House or as the Senate. And this is the first time she's done so. And it's really garnered broad bipartisan support, bicameral bipartisan support. So very exciting development. And we want to congratulate her on her hard work and perseverance in pursuing this. And last but not least, the reason why we believe 2021 is a great year for death penalty repeal in Ohio is that Governor Mike DeWine has not signaled his opposition to this movement, which is significant because Governor DeWine in 1981 was an Ohio state senator, and he helped craft Ohio's death penalty legislation that is currently in effect today. So to see that he has not taken an opposition stance on this on this repeal effort, and in fact has said publicly that his support for the death penalty is waning due to data that has been released recently that shows it is not a deterrent of crime, is a great indication that any bill that would be passed by the General Assembly to repeal the death penalty would not face the hurdle of the veto from the governor. So very exciting developments in the death penalty space. There has been a lot of grassroots activation on this topic, and it's paying off. It's paying dividends, and we can see that here through bicameral, bipartisan legislation to finally add Ohio's name to the list of 23 states that have ridden the death penalty from their state law altogether. And last but not least of our top 3 priorities for this session is redistricting. And redistricting is the process of every 10 years, new district lines are drawn at both the state legislative and the congressional level in order to coincide with population shifts that are reflected in the decennial census. Over the last 10 years, from 2012 to 2020, Ohio has garnered recognition as having some of the worst gerrymandered maps in the country. Gerrymandering being the process of drawing district lines specifically to solidify preferred partisan outcomes. And we can see this here in this stat I provided that Ohio congressional incumbents went 80-0 from 2012 to 2020. It's truly an impressive, it truly is impressive how durable the gerrymandered maps are from this past decade. And keep in mind that during this same stretch of 8 years, the White House has flipped parties twice, the House has flipped parties once, and the Senate has flipped parties twice. So obviously there's been a shifting in political behavior and political opinions across the country and in Ohio, but that is not reflected in Ohio's congressional delegation. So what happened? So how did we get rid, or how did we try to get rid of this process that led Ohioans down a path of gerrymandered maps and rigged elections? Well, there were 2 proposed constitutional amendments over the past decade, one in 2015 and one in 2018, that would establish new processes for drawing our state legislative and our congressional maps. And both of those amendments that were on the ballot garnered 70% approval of Ohio voters. That is a testament to how seriously Ohioans take this issue and how desperately we want fair maps and we want fair representation both in Columbus and in Washington. So I said there were two different processes for how we will be drawing our House and congressional legislative districts. I've included some flow charts that we have created here at the ACLU of Ohio. They are a little bit more intricate, a little bit more convoluted of a process, but that was done in order to inject some much needed reforms into the process. I will be happy to discuss the actual intricacies of these different processes during the question and answer portion of tonight's presentation, but I'll leave these up here and they're going to be included in the slides and in the recording for you if you would like to go back and examine them on your own time. But it's important to know that though there are two different processes for drawing our state legislative maps and our congressional maps, they share three common themes. And the first is that in order for these maps to become law, it requires more bipartisan support. It requires bipartisan thresholds when voting to approve these district plans. And it also implements new rules for drawing maps in terms of how you can and cannot split up counties or cities or local jurisdictions. And those are meant and designed to limit the opportunity for map drawers to pack and crack Ohioans into specific districts. And it also requires public input and transparency in both processes with public hearings and opportunities for Ohioans to submit their own maps that they have drawn on their own. These are great reforms and they were sorely missed in Ohio's redistricting processes of the past. A lot of citizens, organizations, pro-democracy groups in Ohio had pushed for redistricting reform for over a decade. And these reforms and additions to our process are really a testament to their hard work and the fruits of their labor. So now I'm going to kind of go over some of the more general rules, the new rules that are in these processes. There's three main ones. And the first is that the new processes limits the number of county splits. And what I mean by that is it limits the amount of times an individual county can be split and divided up into a number of different congressional districts in this scenario. You see the two images on your screen here, District 13 and District 9. These are currently held by Representatives Tim Ryan and Marcy Kaptur. And I highlight these two districts because they do not have, excuse me, they do not have obviously an entire county, a whole county in their district. Tim Ryan's district cuts out chunks of Mahoning County, Trumbull County, Stark County, Portage County, and Summit County. Whereas Marcy Kaptur's district stretches along the shores of Lake Erie from Lucas County through Ottawa and Huron and Erie through little strips of Lorain and finally into the west side of Cuyahoga County. These two districts under the new rules that are established in the new constitutional amendments are not to be permitted. So a great tool for the public when we're evaluating and analyzing proposed maps is that we'll be able to look at the number of county splits that are used in any proposed maps, and we'll be able to push back on any ones that erroneously split counties for partisan gain. The second rule is that big cities in Ohio, they must be kept whole. This is a huge development because as you can see here in these two images showing District 1 and District 2, the city of Cincinnati currently does not have a voice in Congress. It has been splintered into two different congressional districts where they are swallowed up by a much more conservative portion of Ohio, And this has effectively given the people of Ohio's third largest urban area without a voice in Congress. Under the new rules established in the constitutional amendments, Ohio cities that have more than 100,000 people, but less than a ratio of representation or less than a whole number of people that can fit in a single congressional district, those cities must be kept whole. So that means we're not going to see the splitting of the city of Akron like we do currently. We're not going to see the splitting of Cincinnati like we do currently, but also Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, Toledo. These cities must be kept whole and will be a great improvement for the people of those cities to actually have a voice when determining their congressional representation, whereas they do not now. And then finally, there is a heightened threshold for compactness. That being, you know, a district can't be a sprawling, weaving, winding assortment of county lines and boundaries. I highlight here two districts that illustrate this point very vividly. District 12 and District 7, currently held by Representative Troy Balderson and Representative Bob Gibbs. We can see here that there is the districts have been drawn in a way to where it is an incredibly, long distance from one end of the county or from one end of the district to the other. And these districts that don't have compactness, it's very difficult for their representatives to accurately and adequately represent the communities of interest within these districts. As you can see here, I'll point to District 7 as a good example. We see here that it has two urban areas, two urban centers of Canton and North Ridgeville. Canton being in Stark County and North Ridgeville being in Cuyahoga County. But what we don't see in this district is that it also includes Holmes County, Ashland County, and Medina County, three of the most rural counties in the state. And three of the most conservative counties in the state. So it's very difficult for Representative Gibbs to accurately represent the interests of his constituents because his district covers such a large, sprawling area of different communities, different value communities. It's nearly impossible for him to pursue one constituent's agenda without potentially hurting another constituent's agenda. This would be corrected under the new rules because there is a heightened need for compactness in these districts. And there's also a mechanism that the map drawers and lawmakers would have to provide their rationale in writing with any district plan in order to rationalize their reasonings for creating specific districts. This will be very helpful for advocates if any sort of legal action is taken in order to correct what could be perceived as still gerrymandered maps. So we believe that is another vital improvement to this process as well. However, I want to say clearly and unequivocally, the constitutional amendments that were passed over the past decade do not guarantee fairer maps. It incentivizes fairer maps. It gives lawmakers kind of it incentivizes them to reach bipartisan agreements in order to get a 10-year map. But there's also more practical obstacles that we face as well. I don't know if anybody heard, but recently it has been reported that the U.S. Census Bureau has said that they will not be able to release census block data from the 2020 census until September 30th of this year. That data is typically available to map makers and legislators by early April. So this really throws a wrench in the system and in the process for drawing specifically our state legislative maps, which under the new language of the constitutional amendments for this new process The absolute deadline for state legislative maps to be drawn and agreed upon is September 15th. So obviously there's a disconnect there when we're not even going to be receiving the data until 15 days after the last deadline in the Constitution for having these maps drawn. Now, there's a lot of conversation being happening right now in Columbus and among stakeholding groups as to what sort of release valves or escape valves there are for lawmakers to get around this, whether it be petitioning the Ohio Supreme Court to ask for an extension or to perhaps use a different set of data other than census data. You know, for instance, they could choose to use the American Community Survey data, which is still gathered by the Census Bureau, but it's not nearly as robust and as accurately reflective of our population. So this is a real wrench that frankly, nobody really has any clear answers to at this moment. We're still, we at the ACLU are still working and evaluating the options moving forward. But the goal and the objective of any sort of escape valve is very clear. And that is that we cannot allow this delay in census data, this wrench in the system. We cannot allow that to be used as an excuse to hinder the newly created public input and transparency requirements in these systems. It will be unacceptable for lawmakers and map drawers to use this delay in census data to eliminate the need for having public hearings on these maps, to eliminate the ability for citizens to introduce their own maps for consideration. So we do know that that is one thing we will stand resolute on during this process. And finally, another obstacle we face here is not unsimilar to any other obstacle fair maps advocates have faced in previous redistricting cycles, which is the unknown influences on the process, whether it be from state parties or national political parties, major donors, incumbents that want to see, you know, their seats protected and drawn into a reliably, you know, conservative or liberal district. There's a lot at stake in redistricting. So there's a lot of people that are paying attention to it. There's a lot of money involved in this process in terms of procuring software, hiring consultants, buying data to be used for map drawing. And unfortunately, we don't know who these people and who these organizations are. Now, we have begun to look into this at the ACLU, and we will remain vigilant in trying to make known who all the players of this process are, because that will greatly impact the fairness of these new maps, and it'll also tell us what exactly is being discussed and negotiated behind closed doors. Again, even though there's public transparency provisions in these new processes, there's always going to be backdoor negotiations and deals made. So we're trying to want to limit that as much as possible moving forward through this process. Now, those are our top 3 priorities, and I'm winding down here, and I can't wait to get to your questions. But real quick, I also wanted to mention, you know, we're not working on only these 3 issues. Also at the top of our agenda for this legislative session is finally passing the Ohio Fairness Act, which will classify LGBTQ plus individuals as a protected class, thus protecting them from housing discrimination, employment discrimination, and a litany of other societal costs that are currently burdening members of this community. Again, Senator Nikki Antonio has introduced the Ohio Fairness Act in the Ohio Senate, and it again is beginning to garner bipartisan support. We also focus a lot of our time and energy on drug sentencing reform, as I alluded to in earlier parts of the presentation, as well as police reform efforts, both in the city of Cleveland, the city of Columbus, and the state, in general, but also protecting and expanding other voting rights other than redistricting, namely the protection of Ohio's absentee balloting system, our voter ID laws, and a number of other things. As we've seen following the 2020 election and the misinformation that has been circulating, questioning the integrity of election results, we've already seen a number of state legislatures across the country beginning to introduce voter suppression bills, frankly. Bills designed to stifle ballot access and most dangerously stifle ballot access for subsects of the population. So we will remain vigilant in our work to protect voting rights and to expand voting rights in the state through online absentee ballot requests, additional early voting centers, as well as a number of other reforms. So that was the meat of my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I cannot wait to get to any questions that anyone may have. Alice, I don't know how you want to do. I'm cool. If people just want to raise their hand, I can call on them, or if people were using the chat, or I don't know how you want to.
Let's do that. If you raise your hand, make sure you unmute yourself too.
All right, Tom.
Who has a question?
Okay, well, yeah, it's a question and a comment, which is, listening to your bail reform part of the presentation, I went and grabbed my copy of the Constitution and found, interestingly, Amendment 6 sets the expectation for the accused having the right to a speedy trial. And Amendment 8 says excessive bail shall not be required. How is it that the courts are basically acting outside the scope of the U.S. Constitution?
Well, Tom, that's a great question. And if I had an answer for that, I would probably say we would have had bail reform a long time ago. Unfortunately, like many things in our Constitution, is that there's a wide range of discretion. What constitutes a speedy trial? What constitutes, excessive bail? These are kind of the roadblocks that have been in the way for this effort for years. Obviously I would argue that 4 months waiting in jail is not a speedy trial. But Tom, you just said right there why this reform is necessary, because we view it's not being, the Constitution is not being adhered to in this scenario. But as long as the political power is held by judges and prosecutors and law enforcement around the state of Ohio, this is how those provisions are going to be interpreted. We see this all the time when we're testifying on any sort of criminal justice reform legislation at the Ohio General Assembly, is that the Ohio Prosecuting Attorneys Association, the Judicial Conference, as well as another litany of other groups, will flat out oppose any sort of legislation that doesn't increase penalties, create new penalties, or toughen collateral sanctions. They have a blanket policy that they fight tooth and nail to keep those at bay. And, through their local membership, the local county prosecutors, they wield significant power in the state. So I wish I had a better answer for you, other than it all depends on a judge and it all depends on a prosecutor. Because as I said, cash bail is not required in state law. We could have bail reform tomorrow if every judge in Ohio decided to not, grant bail, decided to do a, employment requirement or do GIS monitoring. We could have this bail reform as long as, we could have it tomorrow. But until the power balance is shifted, we've got to go this legislative route. Well, I saw Tom had a question, and then David, I'll go to you. Or I'm sorry, Ed. I think Ed had a question.
Yeah, I remember reading that the states or counties that don't have bail, they have even a higher show up rate at the trial. Do you have some information on that? I think that's very important.
Well, I don't have any information on that at my fingertips. However, again, I highly recommend if people are interested in the bail reform portion of the conversation to take a look at this report. It gives a very detailed analysis. But yes, the data does find generally that tools such as text reminders, GIS monitoring, pretrial supervision, whether it be a check-in phone call with a probation officer or some other agent of the court, is just as, if not more, likely to create or to compel them to attend their hearing. It's because people don't skip out on their hearing. They want to get through this. They want to end this episode of their life as easily as possible. And we find that when people who are released on cash bail, the ones who don't show up are the ones who had the resources to get out, who had the resources to leave the country. A lot of poor people that suffer because of bail, because of the cash bail system, don't have those resources. So they do show up once they get a reminder or they have a monitoring anklet or other non-cash based tools.
Thank you.
Yes, David.
I'm a great believer in following the money, and you said that over 200 million is spent on pre-trial detention for people who can't make bail. Where does all that money go? Because we're probably incentivized to keep it that way.
Yeah, so that money is spent on, the brick and mortar of our jails. It's spent on building additional jails. It's spent on staffing with corrections officers, medical facilities, individuals that are held pre-trial. If they have any sort of medical needs, that is all required to be bought and paid for by the state while they're under custody. Another source of income is any sort of, kind of like auxiliary appeal process that they will have. And it's just the cost of, spending $85 a day per person in our county jails. And that's why it differs from county to county, which is why it says like 195 million to 250 million. It all depends upon the amount of staff, the medical requirements, the food contracts, the support staff, that are all employed by these county jails. It would be greatly decreased if a jail's population went from 1,500 to 500. Those resources could be easily diverted to other, community-centered programs. But again, I don't want to keep hawking the report. But this is actually a fiscal impact analysis as well. So it does get into kind of the more nuts and bolts of where this money goes and how it could be better spent. So again, please. Okay.
One request, can we get a hard copy of your presentation so that we can click on the hot links and
yeah, I will send a email to Alice that includes with the presentation that'll have the links as well. Alice, I can send that to you right when we're done this evening.
Well, don't rush because I probably won't be looking at it until tomorrow. Anyway, I want to thank you very much for such a comprehensive overview.